Okay, so picture this. You have to flee your home, right,
Yeah.
with your family. A 9-month-old baby.
Oh, wow.
All because your father was just jailed for his political
Oh,
beliefs.
no.
And the only way out, it's across this rugged Afghan landscape on camelback.
On Camelback.
That actually happened. One family faced this during the Soviet invasion.
Yeah.
It's just a small piece of the whole crazy history of this nation. Everyone just calls it the graveyard of empires.
Yeah, that name, it doesn't really do Afghanistan justice.
Right.
They have this vibrant history, so complex. It's a place where empires, they rise, they fall, but the people, they always persevere.
Yeah, it's so much more than just the fighting and the conflict.
Absolutely.
And that's what we're going to get into today, like really dive deep into Afghanistan,
Yeah.
go past the headlines and all that, uncover how this nation, I mean, it's at the crossroads of civilizations.
Right.
Went from this thriving hub, all about culture and learning, to a place that honestly, a lot of people in the West, they just think of war now.
Yeah, that's true. But luckily, we've got a fantastic resource to help us out.
Okay.
It's this NPR series, won a Peabody Award, called Afghanistan, the Center of the World.
I love that.
It's full of personal stories, insights, and it's all told from the Afghan perspective.
Getting it right from the source. That's what I like. So let's start with this idea of Afghanistan being a center. Geographically, historically, what makes it so central?
Well, geographically, you can't get more central than smack dab in the middle of the Silk Road.
The Silk Road, yeah.
Think about this network of trade routes, thousands of miles, connecting east and west for centuries, goods, spices, ideas, all flowing through, making Afghanistan this incredibly diverse place, a real melting pot of cultures and religions.
So it wasn't just like trading stuff,
Mhm.
but like knowledge and beliefs were traveling those routes too. That must have been a pretty dynamic place.
Oh, absolutely. And that diversity, you see it in their geography, too. You've got towering mountains, arid deserts, these fertile valleys all within the borders, rich in resources, minerals, agriculture. But it always seems to face these economic challenges, too.
So a land of contrasts then.
Yeah.
And I think we need to ditch this graveyard of empires label right off the bat.
Yeah.
It's really about the people, how they adapted and survived through all these changes.
Exactly. It's about that resilience. And to really get that, let's step back in time, way back to the 13th century. Meet this guy whose words still resonate today, Rumi.
Rumi. I feel like his poetry is like everywhere these days. I got to admit, I didn't realize he was born in Afghanistan.
He was born in Balkh. It was conquered by Alexander the Great, which really shows you how deep the history goes there. And Rumi's life, it really reflects that turbulent history. He had to flee the Mongol invasion, just like so many Afghans throughout history, fleeing conflict.
So firsthand experience with that upheaval, but what is it about his poetry that's so unique and has lasted so long?
Well, first, he was a Sufi mystic. And Sufism, it's this mystical branch of Islam. It really thrived in Afghanistan, emphasizes a more personal, spiritual connection with the divine, kind of contrasts with interpretations that focus more on strict rules, legalistic traditions.
So it's more about experiencing faith on the inside.
Yeah,
Okay.
exactly. And that deep spirituality, it's all over Rumi's poetry. He explores these universal themes of love, longing, loss, emotions that go beyond any one religion or culture. That's why it still resonates with people, even centuries later.
It's like he bridges the gap between spirituality and just like human experience. But as we've seen, alongside all the spiritual stuff, Afghanistan's also been a place of constant geopolitical struggle.
Yeah, and a huge part of that was this great game in the 19th century. It was this rivalry between the British and Russian empires.
Right.
Imagine these two superpowers, both wanting to control Central Asia and Afghanistan right in the middle.
It was like this high-stakes chess match, but with real people, real countries as the pieces. It must have had a huge impact, even though they were never colonized by either empire.
Absolutely. Their borders got redrawn, leaders manipulated, all to suit those outside powers. That's when figures like Mahmoud Tarzi came along, advocating for Afghan independence. He wanted modernization. He was a brilliant writer, intellectual, believed they needed to embrace the modern world, but keep their Islamic identity too.
It's like he was walking a tightrope, trying to find that balance, tradition, and progress. I bet that tension only went up when they finally got independence in 1919, after the Third Anglo-Afghan War.
You're right. Independence, it brought this wave of hope, the chance to shape their own future. That's when King Amanullah Khan came into power, a progressive leader inspired by this group called the Young Afghans.
Young Afghans sounds like they were ready for change, ready to shake things up.
They were. Think intellectuals, activists, pushing for a modern, self-determined Afghanistan. King Amanullah, he was all about their vision. He brought in Mahmud Tarzi as his right-hand man, made him foreign minister. But there was another key player, Queen Soraya Tarzi.
Okay.
She was Mahmud's daughter and the king's wife. Together, those three, they started this bold experiment, blending Islamic values with modern ideas.
Wow, that's a balancing act for sure. Trying to modernize while keeping those cultural and religious roots. Queen Soraya, she plays an interesting role in this, right?
Oh, definitely. She becomes super important, especially for women's rights. She believed women were essential for nation building, that they deserved education, a voice in society. She even challenged the norms around the veil.
Wait, she removed her veil.
Yeah. In the 1920s in Afghanistan, that was radical.
It must have been.
A real statement. And that wasn't all. She helped set up the first school for girls in Kabul. Huge achievement. She pushed for female education all over the country, paving the way for so many others.
So, some groundbreaking progress. But I imagine they faced some serious pushback. Could they really bridge the gap between the progressive urban elites in Kabul and those more traditional rural communities?
That's the big question of this whole period. They achieved some incredible things, but there are these deep divisions in Afghan society. How fast, how far should these changes go?
Yeah.
And unfortunately, those divisions had huge consequences. But that's a story for next time.
You know, it's amazing how this whole modernization experiment, even though it was so groundbreaking, it also showed the tensions that were already in Afghan society.
Like you said, it was a balancing act. So they're making all this progress in Kabul, but was it really reaching the rest of the country? There had to be this disconnect between the cities and the more rural, traditional communities.
Exactly. It's a challenge everywhere, right? Urban versus rural, modern versus traditional. And in Afghanistan, those divides were made even worse because most of the development was concentrated in places like Kabul.
Creating that gap. Like progress was happening in one place, but not the other. Right. And it wasn't just about geography or the economy either. You had deeply held beliefs, cultural and religious, that really clashed with some of the more progressive ideas they were putting in place. Afghanistan's a deeply devout country. And some people, they saw these reforms as like a threat to their whole way of life.
It's a good reminder that progress doesn't always move in a straight line.
No.
2 steps forward, 1 step back kind of thing.
And in this case, it was a pretty big step back. By 1929, the resistance to King Amanullah's reforms, it just boiled over. Tribal leaders, they started uprisings, and he was overthrown.
Oh, wow. After all that work, all that progress, to see it fall apart so quickly. What happened to those reforms? What about Queen Soraya and Mahmud Tarzi?
It was a tragic turn. The girls' school Queen Soraya started shut down. The veil, they made it law again. Mahmud Tarzi forced into exile. That whole experiment in modernization, at least for that moment, it was over.
So their efforts were cut short, but their ideas, I can't imagine those just disappeared. Did any of those seeds of change they planted take root at all?
Absolutely, and this is where technology comes in, specifically the radio.
Okay, so now we're jumping ahead a few decades into the mid-20th century. What did the radio do for Afghan society?
It was huge. Think about it. For the first time, even in the most remote villages, people could hear news and ideas from all over the world. It broke down all these barriers, opened up possibilities.
It's like they reconnected to that whole center of the world idea, but this time through a new medium.
You got it. And it wasn't just news either. The radio also brought back Rumi's poetry. His ideas about mysticism and tolerance reaching a whole new generation.
Wow, his words found a new way to reach people, connecting them through time and distance.
Yeah.
But it wasn't just about the past, right? The radio also brought in new global influences. That's where Ahmad Zahir comes in, the Afghan Elvis.
Yes, he was an icon, like the perfect example of that cultural fusion that was happening. Elvis meets Bollywood with that Afghan flavor. His music, it captured that spirit of experimentation, that defiance that was starting to emerge in the 60s and 70s.
He was pushing boundaries musically, blending genres and stuff.
Oh, absolutely. He sang about love, heartbreak, the struggles of modern life, even used Western instruments in his music, like the electric guitar. Pretty bold for a society that was still figuring out this whole tradition versus change thing.
Yeah. So how did his music reflect what was going on politically? It's the Cold War era. Afghanistan's walking this tightrope between the superpowers.
Right. It was a tricky situation. They wanted to stay non-aligned, but they were taking aid from both the US and the Soviet Union. And remember, that aid often ended up in the cities, which just made those regional differences even bigger.
So you've got this tension inside the country, tradition versus modernity, and then you add in these outside forces pulling them in different directions. Sounds like a recipe for, well, instability.
And things really went south in 73. Daud Khan, he led this coup, overthrew the monarchy, named himself president, and he started moving Afghanistan closer to the Soviet Union.
How did that shift in power affect Zahir's music?
Mhm.
Could he still sing about love and all that with the political climate getting so tense?
That's when his music gets really interesting. It becomes more melancholy, even political. He starts singing about social issues, corruption, that growing sense of unease, like people were disillusioned.
Like he became the voice of that generation, dealing with all this uncertainty, the shifting political landscape.
Exactly. He captured all those hopes and anxieties this nation caught in the middle of the Cold War.
His music was almost like a chronicle of those turbulent times. But tragically, Ahmad Zahir's story, like so many in Afghan history, is cut short.
I know. 1979, he was only 33, died in a car crash. But the circumstances were suspicious. People thought he might have been assassinated. It was a huge loss to their cultural landscape, and it just cast a shadow over everything, especially with Afghanistan heading towards this disastrous conflict.
It's kind of eerie, right? How his death, Ahmad Zahir's, it's like it foreshadowed all that darkness that was coming for Afghanistan. The Soviet invasion, Christmas Eve 1979, it really marked the beginning of this brutal chapter in their history.
No question, it was a turning point. That invasion, it threw Afghanistan into a decade of war. A war that had consequences that reached far beyond their borders, changed things globally.
We always hear about that war, the Soviet-Afghan War, in the context of the Cold War, the U.S. backing the Mujahideen. But what was it like for the everyday Afghan people, the ones caught in the middle of all that?
It was just devastating. Imagine, right? Your home, your country occupied, cities bombed, villages turned into battlefields, millions had to flee, became refugees, had to go to Pakistan, Iran, anywhere they could.
It's hard to even grasp the human cost of all that. And I bet the war really split Afghan society, too.
Oh, yeah. Created these huge divides. You had people supporting the Soviet-backed government on one side, and then those who joined the Mujahideen, the resistance fighters, on the other. And even within the Mujahideen, you had all these different groups, different ideologies, different goals. It was a messy, brutal conflict, often fought as much between Afghans themselves as against the Soviets.
So war tearing them apart from the inside while they're being attacked from the outside. It's tragic, really.
It is. And then to make things even worse, Afghanistan became this pawn in the Cold War. The U.S., they poured in money, weapons to support the Mujahideen, while the Soviets, they were trying desperately to keep their puppet government in Kabul afloat.
Like no one cared about the Afghan people, about their suffering. They were just stuck in this geopolitical tug of war.
And the irony is many of the weapons that the U.S. gave to the Mujahideen, well, they ended up getting used against them later when some of those fighters turned into the Taliban.
It's the Taliban. It's almost impossible to talk about Afghanistan without talking about their role in everything that's happened.
Yeah.
They rose to power in the 90s, right? It seems like it was a direct result of all that chaos after the Soviets left.
Yeah, you're right. Early 90s, Afghanistan was in ruins. You had warlords fighting for power, and the Taliban came in promising order and stability, but their version of order was very harsh, very oppressive.
They had a really strict interpretation of Islam, didn't they? All those rules, especially for women.
Incredibly strict, especially for women. Forbidden from education, work, couldn't even leave their homes without a man. Music, art, anything they considered un-Islamic was banned. A dark period for Afghanistan. A stark contrast to that brief moment of hope and progress they had back in the 20s.
But even under all that oppression, there were stories of resistance, of people finding ways to keep their culture and spirit alive.
It's amazing. Even in the worst conditions, the human spirit finds a way. People held secret schools for girls. They hid their instruments, kept their stories and traditions alive, passing them down through generations.
Shows the strength of the Afghan people. That determination to hold on to who they are, even when facing such hardship, it's inspiring.
And that spirit's still there today, even with all the new challenges. The U.S. invasion after 9/11, the ongoing conflict, the Taliban coming back. It's been a long, tough road.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, it's clear Afghanistan's story isn't over. It's a story about resilience, creativity, and this deep desire for a better future. It's easy to just focus on the war and the conflict, but there's so much more to this nation.
What really stood out to me through all these conversations is that idea of Afghanistan as a center, not just on the map, but culturally and historically. A place where empires clashed, ideas flowed, art and poetry thrived, even in the darkest times.
And thinking about this journey, through all the ups and downs of Afghanistan's past, it makes me wonder, what does it really mean to be well-informed about a place like this? Is it just knowing about the wars? Or is it about understanding all the layers, the complexities, the human stories that are happening beneath the surface?
That's a really good question to think about. Because in the end, I think it's through empathy, understanding, and being open to different perspectives that's how we can truly appreciate a place like Afghanistan, its strength and resilience.
A nation that's been through so much, yet still keeps striving for a better tomorrow. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We hope you've come away with a deeper understanding of Afghanistan, its people, and its incredible spirit.